This piece is called Forced Migration, and it's sewn with conductive threads. So the threads actually act as a sensor, and when you touch them, they trigger a story that corresponds with that section of this map. So there are 8 different stories with 8 different sections that can be triggered. So you can just touch the
Charles Holloway tried to hold on to a bison bull.
and touch them again to stop, or move to the next section to start a new track. So it's tracking the movement of bison across Turtle Island. So these threads where we begin are actually in Saskatchewan and southern Manitoba. And then here we move over to the Winnipeg area, and the map is going down here to Kansas, and this area is like the Texas Panhandle. And then the strands go up to the Flathead Reservation in Montana. And then we're up into Alberta. And then finally we arrive at Wood Buffalo National Park at the top, which borders Alberta and the Northwest Territories. So I wanted to understand how the Canadian government came to own the majority of bison in conservation, and the fact that there are no bison free-ranging on Turtle Island anymore. So I realized that the population of bison went down to around 100 at the turn of the 20th century. So it made it quite easy to trace the family line of bison back in time to see where those bison came from. And I discovered that many of the bison that are in the Canadian government's hands can be traced back to 5 bison that were captured around 1880. And then their descendants gained numbers and were shuttled around the continent in this way. So each strand represents one recorded life of a bison that was moved. So here we start with 5, and by the time we get up to this section, I believe there are over 6,000 strands representing over 6,000 lives being moved from Buffalo National Park, which was near Wainwright. It's now, it doesn't exist anymore, up to Wood Buffalo National Park, which is still in operation. I really wanted to make you feel that these were individual lives that mattered and deserved to be counted. But at a point, they do turn into this kind of mass where you can't pick them out anymore. So I think those both leave the viewer with different things, different feelings about like the intimacy, I guess, of those stories and getting to know the individual. And it's something I tried to pull out in every story, even when the numbers got bigger, the threads get big, the clumps of threads get bigger. And just physically, there were challenges in that I was sewing them with conductive threads and managing the technology so that the sensitivity of those sensors would work even when they're spread out over long distances, but also not having too many threads so that they create a noise like interference and then short out the sensor. So it was a challenge of finding a balancing point of having enough sensors that it would work no matter where you touched on those threads, but not too many that they created interference and stopped the sensor from working. So there was a lot of trial and error. This is not like a standard practice. I was kind of inventing it as I went and teaching myself how to do it. And then the red that you're seeing represents waterways. So I took satellite imagery of waterways and transposed it onto the map and needle felted it and then embroidered it on top of that to bring out the waterways even more, because I feel like they are the lifeblood of the land. And then the shape of the map comes from the historical range of bison. So this would have been the area that they would have traveled in their migratory route when millions of them still inhabited the land, pre-colonial contact. I was lucky enough to get residencies at Riding Mountain National Park in 2016 and 2017. And I went there to listen to the bison and understand them through the complexities of their communication, which I think a lot of people aren't attuned to or don't give a lot of credit to. But in that, I spoke to a lot of conservation officers, a lot of community members, and I was told certain versions of these stories about the quest to conserve and save bison. And those stories left me with more questions than answers. So it felt like a good way to dig into that past, to understand bison better, but also to understand, I think, the motivations and the politics and the unintended consequences of conservation as we practice it. I have been a practicing artist for 20 years. I did my undergrad in like 2001, I started. So I even see a shift from that point as far as activism being embraced in, I think, maybe the mainstream of art making. For me, I think what's different is how interdisciplinary the work has become. Like, I'm often collaborating with biological scientists or social scientists. My research rarely is looking at other artists and is more often reading historical documents or reading theory, things like that, and that comes into the work. And I think that I treat my work as an opportunity for storytelling that opens up people's empathetic imaginations. I have the opportunity to take what is useful from the sciences, take what is useful from history, but not be hemmed in by those disciplines and being an expert or being, so concerned with the factual aspect of it, and able to play with those things even more. And the technology, the ability to go on YouTube and teach yourself new skills really opens up the way that storytelling or old media like embroidery and new media can be brought together in these really surprising and new ways. The search for facts goes in circles. I find a fact and follow it back to its source, only to find every new telling contaminated.
With Michelle's project, each sort of section is a story, and with that story, she wanted some sort of audio backing track to kind of complement the story itself, but also create the mood of each story, or at least emphasize what she was trying to say with that story. So my job was basically coming up with compositions to complement those narrations. Because you're really forced to use your imagination, right? And with a visual, it's presented to you there, as opposed to something that's just strictly audio. Whether it's a narration, whether you're reading something, you really are using your imagination. And so using, say, a composition or different sounds to complement that really adds to what you're actually going to interpret and see yourself.
I want to speak to you today about what we did, our predecessors, the many branches of the Dominion government and the people who ran them, the treaty negotiators, the Department of the Interior, and Parks Canada. So this is the form that it goes inside taxidermy. This is for a young bison bull. Robe or hide off of it and removed the glass eyes, the horn, and actually the back of the skull plate that had been put here. So the video I made to document that process of removing the hide, cleaning it and restoring it. The hide was gifted to a friend of mine, Casey Adams, who uses it in her art practice and her teaching practice in the community. I think when we see a taxidermied piece, we feel like we're seeing that being brought back to life. But actually what we're seeing most of the time is artifice, right? It's plastic foam and glass eyes. And I always think when we look into the eyes of the taxidermy piece, we think we're seeing the living being, but we're really just seeing a reflection of ourselves. So I kind of wanted to break that down and really get at the heart of what it is instead of the illusion that it so artfully puts out in the world. Taxidermy really glosses over the violence of death. And this process made that all transparent again.
Charles Holloway tried to hold on to a bison bull to anchor him to a post. But the bull dragged the man, and the rope lacerated his hands, cutting to the bone